So I'd like to welcome members and viewers who may be watching our proceedings on Oireachtas TV to the 8th public session of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Climate Action. And before I introduce our witnesses today, at the request of the Broadcasting and Recording Services, members and visitors in the public gallery are requested to ensure that for the duration of the meeting that your mobile phones are turned off completely or switched onto flight mode. I'd like to extend on behalf of the committee a very warm welcome to Dr. Orla Quinn, Secretary-General, and Mr. David Hegarty, Marie Burke and Claire Pike from the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation, Professor Mark Ferguson from Science Foundation Ireland, Kieran Donoghue from the IDA and Rowena Dwyer from Enterprise Ireland. And before we commence our proceedings, I just want to read out a few formalities. I wish to advise the witnesses that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. If you're directed by the committee to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you're entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that where possible you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such ways to make him, her or it identifiable. Finally, members are reminded of the long-standing ruling of the Chair to the effect that members should not comment on, criticise or make charges against any person outside the House or an official by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And due to our time constraints, Dr. Quinn, I might ask that you would give us a synopsis of your opening statement, because the members have already read the opening statement. So if I could give you maybe 3 minutes, and then if you felt there was something else to add throughout the questioning, you can come in at any time.
Thank you, Chair. I have prepared an opening statement, which is just what I was asked for, so I really would appreciate being able to give it.
Could we keep it to about 3 minutes, or try to keep it as short as possible?
I will try and keep it as short as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The members have read your opening statement, Chair, and we are very much briefed on the opening statement, and so as to allow for a concise opening statement and a proper Q&A afterwards. I think that's the reason why the members came to that conclusion.
Would it be possible, Dr. Quinn, to do it within 3 minutes?
I will do my best, but as I say, I have prepared the statement which you asked me to do. It's a small number.
We have received it. We have received it. Yeah. Okay, I'll let you commence.
I'm also conscious this is an important topic for our department, and we've highlighted to all of our staff that the department is here today, yes, and it is important that they also can benefit from the committee as well.
Absolutely, and that's why I want to give it the time. Thank you. Okay. I'll let you.
Thank you.
Limit.
Yeah, I'm going to have it at 3 minutes, and I'll let you know when we get to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Can just for clarity, is Dr. Quinn now going to try and condense, just by speaking more quickly, to get what we've already had and read in preparation for today onto the record?
I don't believe in speaking quickly, so I will give it as the 3 minutes, as you've said.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let us commence, because we're only wasting time, in fairness.
Absolutely.
Afterwards, we'll have the Q&A.
I have no difficulty, and the team are here to assist the committee. We can stay as long as you wish for your questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. So I think you've already introduced my colleagues, so I won't go through that again. But it's important to note the role of the department in terms of enterprise policy, and the fact that as part of all of our strategic work and all of our policies, we are involved in recognising the role of enterprise and the need for sustainable development. We know the development of low-carbon, bio and circular economies present commercial opportunities to companies across many sectors in Ireland, and we will work on that basis. I have touched on, I won't go into it, but again, the importance that we are placing on future jobs for Ireland, which we will be launching next year. And again, that's very much taking into account environmental issues, international agreements and industry responses in terms of global economy and technology sector. Regional development is a particular concern of government, and we have focused very strongly on the need for balanced regional development and job creation, and I have given you some data there in terms of the work that we have done in that area, and of course all focused within the development of the National Planning Framework. again focusing on sustainable enterprise. One of the areas where we are particularly involved is on innovation policy, very strong in terms of our strategy for research development, and again with a strong focus in being a global innovation leader, but very much focused on sustainable resource management. And that brings into many of the areas that your committee are looking at in terms of climate change, decarbonisation. We have and have completed a major refresh of our research priority areas, and again the refreshed now includes energy, climate action, sustainability, advanced and smart manufacturing and sustainable food production and processing. Disruptive technology is another initiative of the department where we have highlighted and put out a major call. We've had a very successful response to that, and that will be coming through at the end of the year. We ourselves are represented on a wide number of committees across government, and we contribute from our research perspective and from the corporate perspective. Corporate responsibility is something we lead on, and we are taking a very strong approach there, working with companies to develop. All of this is around mitigation, obviously, and we are involved in terms of adapting and mitigating, and we have reviewed all of our policies from the climate perspective. But we also recognise that there are many opportunities for Irish business, and again, the whole development of the bioeconomy, circular economy, are opportunities for our Irish companies to get involved, and we have reflected that. I have given you some details of the schemes that are in the mitigation sector. I have touched on the role of our enterprise agencies, IDA, Enterprise Ireland, strong partnerships working with industry in this area, and focusing also in particular on Science Foundation Ireland. I'm delighted Mark can be with us today. In terms of our 17 research centres, and I think Mark can certainly touch on them and the impact that they are having and how we develop. So that's a very short brief,
Thank you.
Chair.
Much appreciated.
I'm more than happy for myself and colleagues here who are expert in their areas to assist the committee.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you keeping that brief. Deputy Sherlock.
Thank you, Chair.
And again, I'm going to keep this interacting to 10 minutes, and I'm going to be very strict on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to thank everybody for coming before us today. According to the IPCC report on global warming of 1.5% CO2 emissions from industry in pathways limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees are projected to be about 75 to 90% lower in 2050 relative to 2010. And that's as compared to, we'd say, the 50 to 80% for global warming, you know, if you're projecting up to 2 degrees centigrade. So I want to ask Dr. Quinn what the emissions trajectory for Irish industry is from now to 2030, and to ask then what the emissions trajectory for Irish industry is from now to 2050. So do I keep going with my questions?
Do you want to take note of the questions and come in, or
Sure.
Yeah, we might just do that. If you want to just keep listing, and the officials will take note and come back at the end of your.
Okay, so that's the first question. And then, if there is a difference there, how different is the current trajectory from the requirement for industry to cut emissions by more than 75%? I note in your submission there is no reference that I can see outlining specific figures in relation to cutting emissions, and I would like to see, you know, actual figures from the department in respect of those figures. The second question then, or second theme if you will, again emanates from the recent IPCC report. How will the department assess the specific actions it must take to lead Irish industry in delivering what we call the deep cuts in overall emissions in the next 12 years? Because we're gone from a 2030, 2050 outlook to one now which is a 12-year outlook. And that's going to be the modus operandi, I feel, of this committee It's the recent IPCC report, the 12 years from now, and how will individual departments actually move towards radical policies, if you will, across their agencies to target those deep cuts that are so necessary, and what specific actions will the Department of Business take. And then just in relation to the RDI piece, to ask specifically, because in your submission again, there are priority areas. I've some degree of familiarity with those priority areas, and I want to know how much money is being allocated across those thematic areas, specifically in relation to energy, climate action and sustainability, and including the decarbonisation of the energy system and sustainable living. I want to know what are the names of the research centres, how much money is each research centre receiving, what is the total amount of monies that is being received for each of those centres, and is there a mapping of the issue of climate change or radical climate action in respect of the 12 years mapped across the area of food, for instance, and smart and sustainable food production and processing, on manufacturing and novel materials, and on manufacturing and materials including advanced and smart manufacturing.
We'll leave it there and we'll bring them in, and you can come in again within your 10 minutes. Is that okay? You're just coming up to 4 minutes there. So in whatever order you wish, there's a number of questions there.
Okay, I think if I start, and I'll ask Mary to come in on the ETS, and maybe Mark, you'll comment on the science, the research centres. I think our main contribution from the Department's perspective to reducing emissions is through the European Union emissions trading system, and that involves approximately 100 of Ireland's largest energy users, who account for 25% of emissions. All Irish industrial installations with installed energy generating capacity of more than 30 are included in the ETS. So I think for the larger energy, they are there. Is it achieving its aims? I think it's true to say that we are not on course to meet our climate change targets. Projections are that we will fall short of both our emissions and our renewable energy targets. We do have a target set, and we're working to achieve that, and it's estimated that we will reach approximately 80% of the target. I think what I have heard is that as the requirements from the EU in particular run out into 2013 to 2020, the sectors covered must reduce by 43%. So there's areas there that we have to work on. Our job is to help companies to move towards those targets. We have a number of schemes in place, which perhaps EI and IDA can talk about their specific schemes, but in particular we work closely with our colleagues in the Department of Communications and Climate Action. It is the case that as enterprises, and particularly smaller enterprises, move to reduce emissions, there are costs involved, and there are areas over time that we need to help and we need to incentivise to do that. You mentioned the food companies, and obviously some of the bigger food companies are in that sector. A lot of them are already in the 100 companies, so they are working already to reduce their emissions. And so there's a huge amount of work going on in that area. I think for us it's very much the research aspects, and Mark can speak on the research institutes, and perhaps I'll just ask Mary to come through on the ETS.
Yeah, I think the emissions trading scheme is the key scheme for getting the large energy users into energy efficiency. We're now moving into phase 4 post 2021, and each iteration of the scheme is more stringent with less auctioning of allowances. Surplus allowances are going to be withdrawn through a market stability reserve, and that will increase the price of allowances within the ETS and lead to the more efficient operation of the scheme. So that scheme has just been negotiated, and the Department of Communications and Climate Action will be going out shortly to consultation on some of the options within that scheme, and they'll be looking for applications on it. but each phase of the scheme is leading to an increased price of carbon, and that will incentivise emissions reduction. That's our main focus for companies in the beverages area, the pharmaceuticals area, the healthcare, the ICT and the dairy co-ops and food companies. Then in parallel there's the large energy user scheme run by SEA, Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland, and there are a significant number of companies engaged in that. There's 200 of the large energy users engaged in that scheme, and they account for 50% of total industrial energy use and 20% of primary energy use. And then there's a series of other schemes for the smaller users to try and improve energy efficiency with mentoring programs, access to technology experts and management training in the area of energy reduction. So the key objectives of those schemes, and there's a number of agency client companies and businesses in those, is to reduce their energy consumption. And as Dr. Quinn referred to earlier, then we've worked with companies on corporate social responsibility and shown how businesses can improve their business activity by showing that they're energy efficient and sustainable. And we're seeing increasingly consumers and users demanding this of corporations.
Do you want to come in on the research centre?
Thank you very much indeed. I can do that. Deputy Sherlock asked me about the research centres that would be involved with climate change. There are four principally. MARI, which is the SFI Research Centre for Marine Renewable Energy. The SFI investment on that is 18.9 million. I'm giving you to the nearest 100,000 euros. There's almost a comparable investment from industry and the EU for all of these research centres, but that's the SFI investment. Beacon, which is about the bioeconomy and will be formally launched tomorrow in Lachine, is an SFI investment of 15 million euros, 15. ICRAG, which is about applied geosciences, is an investment from SFI of 24.8 million. And Vista Milk, which was just recently launched, which is about precision dairy, is an investment from ourselves and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine of 25.6 million. So each of those research centres do research that is relevant in some way or another to climate change. May I extend a very warm welcome to the committee to visit any or all of those research centres. We would be delighted to host you. MARI is in Cork, as is Vista Milk, and Beacon and ICRAG are UCD. So you'd be very happy you'd be very, very welcome. We'd be very happy to host you. Let me just say a couple of words.
I've only 1 minute left.
Very briefly.
Thanks. I launched MARI. Thank you very much for that. Could I ask, I thank you for your answers. We've 10 minutes. That's why we're trying to be as efficient as possible. Could I ask, please, for a breakdown of those figures that they might be sent to us as a committee?
The clerk, that would be great.
Yes, and on the emissions trading, you know, there is a question outstanding in relation to how that model works and the offsets that industry can use. It would be very useful for us to have a better understanding of how that works and who the 100 companies are. You know, if we have a synopsis of that and an aide-memoire, if you will, that would really help the work of the committee.
Direct that to the clerk, that would be fantastic. And anything else that you want to supply in writing, please feel free in the course of this discussion. I'm going to bring in Deputy Marcella Corcoran-Kennedy next for 10 minutes.
Very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for circulating your document and joining us here this afternoon. I just note in your presentation that you're saying that the enterprise sector wasn't identified specifically as one responsible for preparing sectoral adaptation plans under the National Adaptation Framework. And I was just wondering what your views are on that. I mean, were you surprised at that, or had you been invited to make any kind of form of submission?
Well, I think we've been very involved and we feed into any plans. So we ourselves will contribute as requested, and indeed from our perspective on the broader industry front, we will always feed in.
Yeah, I think... So it comes on as okay. I think the reason that the enterprise sector is predominantly involved in the ETS and that those measures are quite stringent on companies, and that accounts for such a significant proportion of the overall enterprise sector's emissions. That may be the main reason why we're not included. specifically.
Okay, very good, thank you. And I noticed that you're driving growth in the global clean technology sector, and I was wondering what opportunities for business have you identified for helping us all to change the way we do business, and how are you planning to encourage people to maybe invest in, I don't know, renewable energies, whatever?
Okay. Well, I mean, we ourselves are part of any of the groups, so we feed in terms of the research piece. In terms of specific programmes to assist companies, there are a whole range of initiatives, and I might ask Rowena from Enterprise Ireland perhaps first, and then IDA, who'll give you details of very specific initiatives that we work with companies.
Okay, thank you very much. So I suppose if you look at the Enterprise Ireland client company base and our strategy to support enterprise, really under it comes under 3 pillars: market diversification, innovation and competitiveness. And it's competitiveness and innovation which are the areas that the environmental supports for companies are most relevant. So particularly for some of our smaller companies, because as the others have mentioned, there is the ETS scheme for the larger companies. We have a significant number of, I suppose, competitiveness supports for companies under our Lean programme, and what that really aims to do is to make companies aware of the dividend that's available by improving their resource efficiency, and that will increase their competitiveness, and in many cases these days as well increase their access to the customer base, because as we know, consumer demand is driving very much behavioural change in companies as well. So our competitiveness supports for companies in this area range from very straightforward guidebooks for smaller companies, because many of our companies are quite small, guidebooks on resource efficiency, through to funding feasibility projects to look at improving production design and making it more environmentally sustainable. On the innovation side, there are quite a few initiatives that are co-funded by ourselves and IDA Ireland and in close cooperation with SFI. Our technology centres, for example, are industry-led collaborative research entities which look at where the industry together can achieve, again, a competitive advantage through research. But in quite a few of the technology centres, there's a strong focus on energy efficiency and improving environmental outcomes. And a very good example of that actually is the Dairy Processing Technology Centre, which is based in UL. It has all of the major dairy players involved, and as well as looking at their cost competitiveness, one of their pillars of research is in the whole area of energy efficiency and environmental research.
Specifically, Deputy, in relation to your question, the environment has been a major feature of the way in which IDA goes about executing its mandate now for more than 10 years. There's 2 specific initiatives, I think, which may be of interest to you. Firstly, in 2009, we introduced an environmental aid programme, which we marketed and promoted to our clients to encourage them to adopt renewable energies, combined heat and power, biomass, CHP, energy efficiency, etc. And there's been very significant take-up on the part of our large energy users of that scheme. And that has allowed a lot of them to go to 100% renewables, or to significantly change the fuel mix and their energy use, etc. The second initiative that we would have introduced is that we established a new forms of FDI team in 2015 and tasked them with going out into the marketplace to identify potential investment opportunities aligned with a pro-environment, positive climate action agenda. And we've won a number of investments in that area, in smart metering, for example, new forms of energy, etc. We also, just this summer, introduced what we call our Go Green programme, which we're actively promoting to our clients to, again, raise environmental awareness within the portfolio and providing financial incentives for them to reduce their energy usage, become more efficient, and move to a 100% renewables model.
Okay, brilliant. And you mentioned Sustainable Energy Ireland, excuse me, and I was wondering, what way are you connecting with them? Because, you know, we heard at one of our previous meetings that retrofitting of, you know, domestic houses is going to be crucial, and it strikes me that there's going to be a lot of business for small and medium enterprises. Do you have a link with the enterprise, the Leos, for example? Because I would have thought they'd be a very targeted group that would be connecting at that level. And if they have a climate agenda themselves, to start looking at businesses that potentially they could assist.
Yeah, I mean, we can just to take it back a little step as well. I mean, when we develop our policy and our research priorities, that then impacts on the way we deliver our business. So we would have done a major refresh of our research priority themes in 2017, and as part of that we introduced decarbonising the energy system as a new priority and sustainable living. So as we roll out programmes and as we adapt, all of these then set the priorities. So on the particular aspect of the Leos, can I come back to you, unless, David, you have...
I think, Deputy, we don't have any facts and figures on that, but I think, I mean, you're essentially, I think you're right in your assertion that this might represent an opportunity for smaller firms. We'll see if we have any information on that, any of any on Leo's funding or assisting companies in that area. But I think absolutely we take your point that it is an opportunity, and I think that's an important, more generally, that there are opportunities in adapting to climate change, and what we want to do is to make sure our programmes and our agencies are able to facilitate and exploit those opportunities.
Because the message is coming through, I think, from everybody that a whole of government, whole of society approach is going to have to be taken. And I would have thought that even getting the messaging through the Leos around climate change, again, I think is something that we could certainly welcome.
Absolutely, and even in our refresh of priorities, we've identified advanced and smart manufacturing and novel materials. So again, we see them as opportunities, but that we would redirect funding and grants in that area as well. So the Disruptive Technologies Fund had a very specific theme in that to address climate change challenges. And again, as we roll that out, we would want to see the impact of that.
I can just say that we co-fund with the Sustainable Energy Authority of Ireland. In fact, we are the major funder in some of those research activities, but we co-fund with them, making sure that the research is aligned to their policy and implementation. Clearly, it hasn't anything to do with retrofitting, it has to do with future stuff. And just to add, there will be new opportunities, not just in mitigation, but in active removal of greenhouse gases. So I do hope the committee is going to look at new science, which is about taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. There are major opportunities for Ireland in this area. There are various technologies which go all the way from rehydrating bogs, peatlands, all the way through to pumping carbon dioxide into the spaces that are vacated by gas extraction, giving you low carbon gas. Cork would be a good place for that. Through to absorption of CO2 from crushed basalt, of which we have a lot, particularly in Donegal, and a new way of manufacturing concrete. And then to very active CO2 capture. And just to show you that some of that research is coming through, I mean, there's a new company called Silicon Kingdom Holdings, which is the whole of 2 weeks old, and they are doing active carbon dioxide capture in Ireland. And according to their CO2, they're going to build a small pilot CO2 farm over the course of 2019 and 2020, with 1 or 2 clusters of CO2 collectors, each capable of capturing about a tonne of CO2 a day. And their plan envisages CO2 farms in Ireland of 120,000 collectors, which would capture 3 megatons of carbon dioxide per annum. So I think in managing climate change, we definitely have to do all of the mitigation things that you're focused on, but we also have to think about active ways of managing greenhouse gases by removing them from the atmosphere, because you will never have a carbon zero economy, and that's got to be part of the strategy. And there's a lot of science that's mostly at the research stage, but some of it's filtering through to commercialisation.
Thank you.
And
very briefly, you've less than a minute.
Good job as the last one. You mentioned some of the state agencies there. You talked about bogs, of course, and I'm from the Midlands, so naturally enough, my ears pricked up straight away. I was just wondering what kind of engagement that any of you have had with, the biggest land owners in the country, which are Bordemona and Coillte, in terms of the resources that they have and how, I know they're very progressive in terms of what they want to do themselves. And the other question, or the other, it was more of an observation really, is, in terms of the responsibility to get the message out that while we all have to, it's a huge challenge for us to decarbonise the society. There's huge opportunities for business there, and about getting that communication strategy out there. And I'm wondering if that's something that you're really prioritising in light of the IPCC report.
I can pick up on the first bit, and that is we through the ICRAG Research Centre, which I advocate you go and talk to Murray Hitzman, who's the director of that, Professor Murray Hitzman. I mean, rehydrating bogs is the most effective way of capturing carbon. Basically, the plant takes carbon dioxide out of the environment. It doesn't decay properly, so releasing all of the CO2, it's trapped in the bog. So there are people looking very actively at that, and that research group would work very closely with the board in a moment. I'll pass over to my colleagues for the others.
I think maybe just on the communications generally, we feed into government policy. We don't set it ourselves, so in that it's important that we're on all of the groups, the relevant groups. So we're represented, for example, on the Climate Action High-Level Steering Group. We're on the Cabinet Committee that the Taoiseach chairs on Economic Infrastructure and Climate Change. We're on the Technical Research and Modelling Group, the Senior Officials Group on Sustainable Development Goals, Energy Labelling, Offshore Renewable Energy. So all of those areas, we bring the expertise of our colleagues in our offices and agencies. And I should also mention, who's not here today, is our National Standards Authority of Ireland, because again, one of our offices have a huge role in setting standards in this area. So we bring that into all of these fora, and we inform, and we work collectively with colleagues to inform government policy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to Senator Grace O'Sullivan.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I suppose we're here today because, you know, Ireland is seen as failing in terms of any climate targets. And as the Taoiseach said himself just a few months ago, we are a laggard, and all the information is stacking up to show us that. And in fact, that IPCC report just last week gives us a 12-year window. So, I mean, our ambition cannot be great enough in this area. So I have a number of questions here with regard to just transition. In your report, Dr. Quinn, you rightly recognise the economic opportunities which come from the transition to the low carbon and circular economies. However, you fail to refer to the impacts on employees and communities which have come to depend on this fossil fuel economy. And these impacts are significant, and we must address them out of concern for the welfare of the citizens and communities. In addition, failing to ensure a just transition making the transition even harder. So my questions are, what is your department's understanding of the just transition process, and what are your plans for the coming years? We have a Just Transition Commission, but SIP2, ICTU, Forza and Impact are all working on this issue and have been for some time. But what are you doing to help the trade unions support their employees? So if you could give just an indication of specific things you're doing in that regard. So in the area of health, artists, education, community work, these are low carbon job areas in Ireland, which is great. What supports are you giving to these industries to grow with regard to climate? And just, are you refusing to support the expansion of fossil fuel-based economy activity? So have you set a line in the sand and said, that's it, it's over, no more support for the fossil fuel-based industry from an enterprise perspective? With regard to renewables, renewable jobs there's some 7,200 jobs in solar at least waiting in the pipeline. David Connolly's Green Plan Ireland or the Northern Ireland Green New Deal Group have both outlined how there are opportunities for 100,000 new jobs if government takes action now. And I don't see any mention of this kind of ambition in your report. And why is this? Because as you outlined, Professor Ferguson, there is opportunity. So why aren't we unleashing that opportunity? And we're not seeing it in your report. FDI, such as Microsoft, is looking for 100% renewable energy to run their offices, and this has not been provided by the IDA. Why not? We are the second windiest country in Europe after Scotland. In Scotland, 50% of renewables are community co-op owned. So why are we not doing the same here? What measures could be put in place to support the community cooperative system? So providing good quality jobs and cheap energy for rural Ireland, what are you doing in this regard? What is your definition of sustainability with regard to climate change? What is the analytical approach used by the department in assessing the sustainability of business in Ireland? Do you carry out carbon footprint analysis? Do you measure material flows? Have you got a unit within the necessary expertise to analyse the sustainability and climate impact of policies which affect business?
Can I bring them in?
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of getting the answer, and you may want to come back in at the end.
Yeah,
I don't mind.
I have.
Yourself.
And I mean, anything that isn't answered here, it's on record. So if you could come back and provide it to the committee, it would be much appreciated.
Sorry, Senator, I just want to give you time to come back if you needed to. And there may be other issues there that relate to other departments, whatever, but I'll let you answer.
I mean, I think it's certainly true to say, Senator, that the economic and employment implications of a transition to a low-carbon economy and addressing that concept of a just transition were identified in the National Mitigation Plan. That plan is the responsibility of the Department of Communications, but we obviously have a very strong interest and have played our part as a stakeholder on that. We have to acknowledge that there are implications for employment in any transition in areas, as Deputy Kennedy mentioned, in terms of peat extraction, power generation, and indeed in other environmental services. We would be very conscious of the transition period that some enterprises need to get from their current state into a low-carbon state. And the bioeconomy policy statement, for example, certainly identified the opportunities to grow rural and regional businesses and jobs. And we see that as a major opportunity. In fact, I think when the Minister published her most recent budget statement, her focus very much was on Brexit, regional development and innovation, and they're the three themes which we are working with her to deliver. So we would certainly see huge potential to grow rural business. We do accept that for some enterprises they're not there and it'll take time. We also recognise that our current employment figures are extremely successful, and we are now facing a very different set of problems than we faced 7 years ago when we had 16% unemployment. We're now at 5.4. So again, the model that we are working on, some of it will flow from the research that Mark outlined in terms of the bioeconomy centre, the Lachine, the pilot centre there, and we're absolutely aware of the new employment opportunities from a circular economy. It is one of the areas we have flagged and we're currently working on, which we hope to publish in January, is the Future Jobs Initiative for Ireland, because we've had up to now the Action Plan for Jobs, as you know, which has been extremely successful and has delivered 370,000 jobs, but we are in a different phase of our economic development now in Ireland, and so what we are working on is where is the quality jobs, where are the pressure points, where are the areas where Ireland can really innovate and add value, and that reflects back to the work we've done in identifying our research priorities, because that will absolutely set our priorities and how we advance for the next future cycle of Ireland's development. So I think that's positions it where we are. I don't know, do colleagues want to come in on anything on that?
Yeah, maybe, Senator, in relation to your observation in relation to Microsoft wishing to move to a 100% renewables model and IDA's lack of support for that, I think it's very important to put on the record that we in IDA actively encourage and support all of our clients to act in an environmentally sustainable way. As you know, the vast majority of them come from very mature, well-developed economies with a high environmental sensibility, and they bring that sensibility and environmental awareness and a desire to embrace best practice in relation to sustainability into this economy. Microsoft moved to a 100% renewables energy model globally in 2014, so they're already there. And recently they've entered into a power purchase agreement in Ireland with a wind farm constructed by General Electric in County Kerry. So that's another practical example of what our clients are doing in this jurisdiction to act in an environmentally sustainable manner.
I suppose the point is that, you know, having the facilities here to entice FDI into Ireland, being ready to support them would be really worthwhile, and that's why the more support IDA would give in the area of renewables, and that would be.
And I suppose we support them in two forms, Deputy. As I alluded to previously, we have an environmental aid programme, so there's a suite of financial incentives that we can deploy and utilise with our clients if you wish. But then separately and consistent with government policy going back, I think, to 2010, we sponsored the establishment of an International Energy Research Centre in the Tyndall, down in Cork, and brought in an energy research centre by one of our clients, United Technologies. Deputy Eamon Ryan at the time would also have been a major advocate for that centre. And that's proved very positive, again, in sending a signal to our clients about the importance that we attach to the environment. And it also enables them to do environmental related research in this jurisdiction.
Dwyer, did you want to come in?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Just again, probably similar to Curran, maybe some practical examples of, you've mentioned the opportunities that are available for enterprises in Ireland in the clean tech area, in this whole area. And it's probably worth noting that Enterprise Ireland has for a number of years had a designated sectoral grouping of what we call our clean tech clients, recognising that there are opportunities in renewable energy, in energy efficiency, in smart services and so on. And this grouping are supported similarly to all other Enterprise Ireland clients in their research and innovation, in their competitiveness, and in areas such as management development to actually make them better at realising the opportunities. So it's actually just supporting the enterprises in this sector to realise those opportunities. And I think very importantly as well, to build awareness, and we do this a lot, build awareness between companies of what other companies are actually providing as services. So there is, while there is a lot of work done in terms of making companies aware of energy efficiency and how it can impact on their business, it's also the ecosystem bringing companies together to make them aware of what other companies are actually providing as a service, and in generating the opportunities that you've mentioned. I think it's also worth mentioning as well the fact that the EU's research Horizon 2020 programme is one which Enterprise Ireland is a coordinator for. Ireland has secured, and Irish companies have secured a significant amount of funding over the last number of years in the whole area of energy efficiency, grid integration and ocean energy in particular, and they're supported by Enterprise Ireland and the other agencies in actually winning this research funding, again to improve their understanding, but also to be able to deliver services and products in this area that will make them market leaders.
Thank you. I'm going to bring in Senator Paul Daly. You have 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, I don't know if I need 10 minutes. I'll be as brief as I can. Most of the conversation at the moment has been about working with existing companies and trying to improve their efficiencies. And just on that, how far outside the factory gate do you go, or do you have an input in that? And I suppose maybe where I'm coming from is in relation to the National Development Plan, the National Planning Framework. You can have the most efficient company business, whatever their business may be, but if they're geographically located in the wrong place, their workers can have an enormous carbon footprint. So how far down the line do you go on having an input in that? And I suppose a very simple question, I hope I phrase it properly. Like, jobs and job creation are king, and I suppose especially for the IDA and Enterprise Ireland. So you have a super company coming knocking on your door, massive FDI opportunity, massive job potential, depending on the nature of the business, may not tick all your boxes in your policies when it comes to, again, their carbon footprint or their greenhouse gas emission in whatever production they're going to do. Where would you draw the line? Where would climate change take precedent, and where would you stop and draw the line and say, sorry, no, we're not interested, you may go somewhere else? If you know what I'm asking. Like, at the end of the day, it becomes public that you've turned away a company that was going to create 10,000 jobs, for talk's sake. But how do you justify, well, look, they were going to have an enormous effect on our, as a nation, our greenhouse gas emissions. So where do you draw the line, or where do you finish your negotiations with them as to how they can achieve what are more acceptable figures when it comes to CO2 emissions or whatever? I'd like to know how much of a precedent it would take in such negotiations. And I suppose just finally, with regards to intercommunication, interdepartmental communication, the initiatives you're driving through research and development, and the companies that are buying in and that are actively involved in research and development and improving their processes through the work you're doing with them, how successful are they, or how difficult is it for them to recruit the employees that they may need to work on their new initiatives? In other words, what communication have you got with education and science, for example, with regard to apprenticeships or third level or training or education for the workforce that possibly is going to be needed if people row in with you and are successful in developing their industries effectively?
Okay, maybe I'll start and colleagues can chip in. Maybe to start at the bottom of the final question, we are very involved with our colleagues in education. The Minister for Education holds the chair of the National Skills Council, and we're obviously members of that, and we would feed in very strongly in terms of our view of the economy, the apprenticeships, the skills, because we hear that directly from the industry representative groups. So we have a very strong role to play there, and we do that. In relation to your question about how far do we take it from the enterprise and then there's the employees, that's not really our role, Senator. Our role is to work with enterprise, but we do very much work with companies, per se, for example, in the retail sector, where we have a retail forum that our own minister chairs. So things like packaging or plastic packaging, we can influence there and support our colleagues, again, in the Department of Communications, who have overall responsibility in that area. But again, the fact that retailers have announced initiatives to reduce amount of plastic packaging, again, we can support that. We can bring companies together. I know EI are convening an industry-led conference on that in early 2019. So those areas are all areas where we have what I would call soft influence and work collectively with colleagues across government. It is not our role to assess what other colleagues are doing in terms of their particular initiatives, but we will certainly come back through on the evidence of the research, and I think it's on that basis we would work. I think your question around how far would we go, Curran may wish to comment, but we operate within the policies set by government and the guidelines and the criteria set down, and so from that perspective, we use the current and guidelines that are there. I don't know, Curran, do you want to add a word to that? But Ireland is not in the business of attracting business that is not sustainable or that damages our reputation. And I think that's really where we position ourselves.
Thank you, Secretary General. It's a very interesting question. I would say that the vast majority of the sectors that we target are relatively low emitters of CO2 when you think of the composition of our business. A lot of it is now services business rather than manufacturing, and they generally tend to have a low carbon footprint and are attracted to compact urban centres with public transport, etc. So both in terms of the commuting patterns associated with their workforce, the type of goods and services that they deliver to the global marketplace, we don't associate them with potential damage to the environment from a carbon emitting perspective. And then secondly, on the manufacturing side, those types of clients that we win in the life sciences or biopharmaceutical sector, they've all embraced very strong environmental agendas at corporate HQ overseas. They bring that into Ireland. We see them immediately taking steps at their local sites to embrace 100% renewable energy, etc., and to take a range of steps consistent with the best interests of the environment. So right now, specifically in relation to your question, we've never had to turn down an investment on the basis that it's high CO2 emitting. We haven't come across that scenario.
I might move on now to Deputy Brian Stanley. You're down for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Oireachtas. I want to welcome the panel here. The question I have really is around, the first one is around, work with the development agencies. What work is happening in terms of developing the circular economy, and particularly, the reuse of waste where it can be put into some kind of productive use. I'm just wondering, can some of the panel or the Secretary General maybe cite some examples of where initiatives like that are being taken?
Do you want to take that?
I have a few questions, so we'll just kind of keep them brief. Keep them fairly brief. Yeah.
So maybe I'll quickly respond to that. We are funding a research centre called the Beacon Research Centre. That's about the bioeconomy. It officially launches tomorrow. It's in the Lisheen disused mine, so that is part of it. And what they're doing is they're concentrating on how you can get high-value products out of waste, specifically the dairy industry, where when you process dairy products, you have byproducts that are often put into landfill. You can take those byproducts and you can make them, for example, into lactic acid. Lactic acid is a starting block for building a bioplastic. So you can make plastics from milk, to be kind of simplistic about it. Is that scaling? Yes. Glanbia, which as you know is a large co-op, secured a very large grant from the European Union, about 30 million euros. We and others are co-funders of that. They're building a pilot plant to process the waste that has been piloted in this research that I've spoken about into building blocks for the circular economy. We want to do a lot more in fishing, where there's a lot of waste, and in other areas. So this is an active area, the bioeconomy. There's a policy from the Taoiseach's department on it. We have implemented with very good funding through a research centre, and there are companies pulling through on that, and we're working closely with our colleagues in Enterprise Ireland, IDA and others. Of course there's more that can be done.
Could you ask the name of the company that's going through this in Lisheen?
In Lisheen, it's called Beacon, is the research centre, and there is a bioeconomy foundation, which is a charitable foundation, that's taking over the use of the mine, and that has also got a lot of industry contributions. And the pilot plant being built at Lisheen is being built by Glanbia.
And thank you. It's just on the edge of my constituency, so I'm familiar with it.
Well, we'd be very delighted to welcome you tomorrow to the opening.
Lisheen. Thanks for the invite. It's the first one I received. Could I ask just in relation to Bordemona, for example, to just take here's an industry, that's in huge transition, and they're moving away from carbon, moving away from peat, and things are going to be stepped up a gear very quickly on that. Just in terms of one of the big issues that we're facing is the availability of biomass, and I'm just wondering, while I know this crosses over with the Department of Agriculture and other departments, what is being done to develop a biomass industry here? And just in relation to the related question is in relation to biogas. It's if you take what's happening on the continent, that other countries are ahead of us on this. Other countries, as a percentage, don't have as large an agricultural sector as we have. They don't have the peat sector that we have. They don't have the land mass to put some of these plants. We do. And in terms of those two related issues, Bordemona with biogas and biomass, but not exclusively Bordemona, but they're the ones who are going to be, they're really facing a huge transition, and particularly in the Midlands. You might just address that for me.
If I can come back on that, Chair, I think we recognised back in 2016 in the Action Plan for Jobs that there was opportunities in this area, and we strongly promoted the development of the development of a bioeconomy strategy. Now that strategy is being led jointly by the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine and Communications, and they're taking forward a number of actions. One of it is around making sure we have actual coherence between all the sectoral strategies which impact on the bioeconomy, so that's really mapping out what is happening across the board. They're also looking at a network of representatives of commercial entities operating within the bioeconomy and the relevant public bodies. So again, I think that's where you would see your Board Namona coming in. Again, looking at recommendations of how that can be impacted. Research, and Mark has already alluded to that, particularly in real-world applications, comes through. And then looking at current legislative definitions of waste,
Could I just raise a point with you? The SEAI paper in 2016, that said it had potential for 3,000 jobs.
Yeah.
Someone even has 2,000. I don't see any initiatives happening in the 2 or 3 years since then to try and, kickstart this industry. I don't see it happening.
Okay, and I think then, Deputy, that's where this group is really pulling together, as I've outlined, even just pulling the sectors together, ensuring greater coherence and looking at the value chain propositions. And they've actually got on there, as part of their terms of reference, establishing conditions required for commercial viability. So it's a work in progress, is what I would say to you. And I think probably those two departments could be well placed to give you more detail on that.
Okay.
Final question.
The final question I have is just in relation to retrofitting and energy conservation. What I suppose the question I have around that is around the issue of training and reskilling workers. There's a huge amount of work to be done there, because people will be moving out of the types of industry that we're in now. We need to adopt very, very quickly. Has the department, indeed, other relevant sectors taking this on board? They need to accelerate this.
And I think that's back to the skills agenda and the apprenticeships and the training and the impact that's being done there. Mary, do you want to?
A number of years ago, we did some research with the expert group on future skills needs in the green economy, and identified some of the skills that would be needed for retrofitting, including training up apprentices at the time, which had been really low, looking at building information modelling systems, looking at installation of windmills on land and sea and the maintenance of them, because we hadn't got the skills at the time. So there was a number of recommendations in that report that the Department of Education took up with regard to apprenticeship training and traineeships, and more particularly then for graduates coming out. We were looking to see whether they needed specific graduate programmes in some of these areas of renewable energy, but the decision was they need to come through the core programmes and do add-on modules as they specialise in these particular areas.
Thank you very much. I'm going to have to move on to Senator Michelle Mulherin. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Catherine. Firstly, I wanted to ask.
Might just put it down. Yeah, thanks.
It's not covered anyway. As regards businesses and transitioning to their obligations under a low carbon economy, or our objectives, I just wanted to know, have you calculated what that cost would be, say, on FDI and on indigenous industries? And I'm talking about from the point of view of bearing carbon taxes, that we're told we need more carbon taxes, the PSO levies in their electricity bills, and every other thing that we're going to be asking of them. And what is the cost, and how will that affect our competitiveness internationally, and how has this been assessed, and has it been assessed formally, and how has that been done? I also wanted to ask, in relation to your mandate now that you have under the National Planning Framework to roll out job creation in the regions that are maybe structurally weaker and haven't been attracting jobs in the same fashion that the big urban centres have. I mean, we're hearing job announcements quite regularly. I know we only hear about maybe the FDI jobs, but they're all still in the cities. They're not in rural areas, and I say about rural areas, I mean the counties or the areas that don't have the big cities. So it would seem that in terms of our objectives to spread development more and to take the pressure off Dublin, the Galways, the Limericks, wherever, that the natural I suppose, way that the economy is developing is these cities, they're becoming more and more pressurised, because that's where everybody wants to invest. So I just also want to know, what policies in particular have you developed since the National Planning Framework, and on account of the different regional action plans for jobs, to ensure that there is more job creation in these areas? What specifically are you doing? And I suppose to the IDA and the Enterprise Ireland, particularly IDA representative here, you know, I know even my own home county, Mayo, I don't know if they come before you, but there are regular parliamentary questions asking how many visits by the IDA with the potential investor into a county like Mayo, a county like Roscommon, counties that have some FDI. There has been growth in FDI, but it's in the companies that are there and they've been there for years. We welcome that, but there's no new investment. And very often it's a handful of visits in a year. And I just want to know, what are you doing now to realise the objectives of the National Planning Framework that's different, that's specific to areas, you know, bearing in mind that, you know, there are issues in getting investment in these areas, because something concrete, because, and maybe, you know, one thing also that comes to mind is the whole area of data centres, and I know we're told that there's issues around, obviously Apple, there was an issue with the planning permission there that delayed the whole thing, but where, again in Mayo, we have planning permission for a data centre where there's a high-speed transatlantic fibre optic cable, and there's planning permission for a combined heat and power plant right beside it, and there's no takers for the data centre. So what's been done in that sort of case to promote it?
Just have time to come back, Senator. Is that okay?
I just have a tiny thing to add, and then I also wanted to ask you that, are there some parts of the country more attractive than others from an investment point of view and an energy security point of view? I suppose to be clear about it, some parts of the country have better energy security, better transmission, better transmission infrastructure than others. And is that an impediment? And can you identify the areas of the country where it's not so attractive, if you're looking for a lot of power, that you might not invest, and where we need to be investing in infrastructure? I have to bring them in just for time. I'm just conscious of you getting the answers to your questions. Who would like to come in?
I'll start maybe just from the regional employment side in particular. We've had an increase in employment of 12% from 2015 to 2018, and 61% of that increase has been in counties outside Dublin. We have a target that we should be within 1% of the national average outside of, and all of the regions of Ireland have achieved that, with the exception of one, which is the Midlands. In your own area, Senator, in the West, it's 6.7. The state is 6. So we're very conscious that employment is growing right across the country and in all areas, and as I say, the border really is still a difficulty for us. Our policy aims, and I talked earlier.
Sorry, can I just briefly on that? I accept that, but the issue is, and it's borne up by the CSO census data, they're migrating into the bigger towns. Like people are leaving the more rural areas and they're going to the towns, even in my region. So that's a problem.
I just conscious of time. Sorry.
I mean, certainly from the regional development strategy, and I think the National Planning Framework makes it very clear that the purpose is to develop clusters and centres. I don't think we will ever see in Ireland a concentration of jobs in every village, but what we do need to do is make sure we have sufficient presence right across the region, and I think you would find people would say the same in Dublin. They're commuting as well, but it is trying to make it, as I say, to cluster and make it attractive for companies to locate and attractive for people to be there, and I think that has been extremely positive, and both of the agencies have been extremely successful in growing jobs, and the LEOs also have been very successful right across all of the regions of Ireland. So from our perspective, regional employment is one of our main priorities. I mentioned that earlier. Yesterday we met with the heads of the 8 regional action plans for jobs, all private sector people in each of the regions, with committees highlighting the particular attractiveness and opportunities in each region, and they differ, and how we can support them. So we have a team of people in the department working collectively with each of those regional action teams, and that to me is how we drive it forward. I'll touch on the data centres, or do you want to come in, Curran, first on the IDA, the visits?
Sure. Building, Deputy, on the Senator, on the Secretary-General's observations, you make very valid points. I think our approach to this is that we have to try and match the right locations with the profile of the investor. It's very, very important that we take into account the investor's needs. And when you consider that an increasing number of them are in the services sectors, they do emphasise the importance of locations either in or near cities. But that's not, that doesn't prevent us from showcasing other locations. So we take a hierarchy approach: cities, city regions, large towns and rural areas as appropriate. So manufacturers, for example, they don't want to locate in a city or a city region. They want their own dedicated site in a more rural location. So we do showcase a variety of locations to our clients. Specifically in relation to Mayo, if memory serves, we've taken a step to put an advanced office building into Castlebar, and the government has given us €150 million specifically for a regional property development programme to put some of the enabling infrastructure in place in advance of an investment decision, with a view to raising the overall attractiveness of a variety of locations, including rural areas. Specifically then in relation to data centres, there's approximately 45 data centres in the country, and we look at their development in terms of two phases. It began in the 1990s, and the vast majority of them were attracted to the eastern region near Dublin, the eastern seaboard, for two reasons. One, they needed high-capacity, high-speed broadband, and they needed access to the high-capacity points in the electricity grid. So there was an automatic bias towards the eastern seaboard, which was understandable from their perspective in terms of enabling their businesses to operate. What we see now, following EirGrid's reinforcement and investment in the national grid on a national basis, and following investment in fibre optic cables, is that we anticipate a second phase of growth where the data centres will take a more active look at regional locations, potentially including your region as well. We've completed a report looking at a variety of locations in a regional context that could potentially accommodate the next phase of data centre development. So we now see the data centre industry potentially becoming an instrument or a vehicle for regional development.
I'm going to move on to Senator.
The additional cost of doing business.
With the electricity, is it?
Well, basically.
Carbon taxes,
yeah,
is it?
Yeah,
carbon taxes, PSO levies, yeah. Sorry, David Hegarty. Thank you.
Just on that, we haven't done a formal assessment of that, of looking at the, what would be the costs to the enterprise sector of increasing the carbon tax or the PSO levy. There is some research done by the ESRI, which I just wanted to mention, Senator, in response to your question. It was published just last week. It argued that in terms of the export sector, the effects of an increase in the carbon tax of, I think, €5 a tonne would be relatively small in terms of competitiveness. That's their finding. I just wanted to draw to your attention. I mean, there are limitations, I think, attaching to their methodology, and whether one can infer from that a much bigger increase in the carbon tax, you can't infer from that much larger increases wouldn't have a stronger effect, perhaps.
Senator Marshall.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose coming in, most of the questions that were floated through my head have been answered. There's a couple of things that I would echo Senator Mulherin's concerns over the rural versus urban and Senator Daly. There's a point made that I'd like just to ask you a little further on. You made reference to the fact that most of your investment is in low carbon industries where it's not maybe a problem or it's not something that it's high on their priority list. If we have industries that actually are, and this is a concern for them, is there enough support or mechanisms there to take these industries to the next level that actually gets them from historically being an industry that present a problem or an issue to present them as an industry that actually will be able to contend with new regulations and new commitments to targets that they will struggle on their own to achieve?
I might start those questions first, if that's okay.
Again, Senator, it's important to restate we don't target sectors or industries that have a large carbon footprint or associated with high carbon emissions. That's the starting point. To the extent that an investment might appear in our portfolio where its carbon footprint was, say, above average. We do have a range of programs and schemes that we would draw to the attention of that investor to enable them to proactively lower their carbon emissions by moving, to example, for a 100% renewable energy model. So we would be proactive in that context.
Rowena.
Specific policy on that. Refer to.
We have an environmental aid programme, Senator, that I referred to earlier, which specifically provides financial incentives to allow companies to move to a 100% renewable energy model, to embrace combined heat and power, or biomass or other energy efficiency technologies.
Could you provide us with a note on that? Would that be possible?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, to submit that to the clerk here, that'd be fantastic.
Yes, more than happy to do so.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Rowena.
Senator, I was just going to come in to echo what Curran has said, but just also to make clear that for domestic enterprises who might be facing the same challenges, the larger ones that you've alluded to, Enterprise Ireland has also for a number of years had in place a programme to support significant capital investment to allow companies to, whether it's a CHP investment or something like that, to again to bring them to an improved position vis-à-vis their emissions or their carbon footprint.
Thank you. Just a question in relation to, you made reference to the action plan for jobs and the success of that, and I suppose we're in a different space now. We're dealing with energy and it's having an effect on our greenhouse gas emissions. But just to go back to the success of the action plan for jobs and the governance of that, because what we have become very aware of here in our work to do with climate change is that this needs to be cross-departmental. There needs to be a clear governance structure if we want to meet our 2030, 2050 targets. And just from your experience, I know it was within the department, but how that governance worked, how you put in place, I suppose, you held the different public bodies to account, and was the structure there? Was it new? Because, as you say, we reduced our unemployment from 15 right down to 16%, right down to 5%. And I think we would appreciate any kind of enlightenment in relation to that governance structure that may be able to work for us.
It was a particular methodology that was put in place, Oireachtas, and it was led by ourselves in the Department of the Taoiseach. So we had that whole of government approach from the word go. It was done on the basis of each department identifying within the framework that we had set the actions that they could do to deliver, and then there was a very strong focus on delivery and implementation, and we would have met quarterly, I think, with the Taoiseach as part of a Cabinet Committee to report on the action plan for jobs and how departments were doing. So I suppose it was put in place, it had a very strong governance approach, which I think was important. It also had a very strong input from colleagues, and it was obviously recognised as a huge important emergency issue for Ireland to address our unemployment problem. So it had a huge buy-in around the system, and people recognised its importance.
And would you have had Secretary-Generals on that committee as part of the Taoiseach at your mini cabinet in relation to jobs? Was it Secretary-Generals of all the different departments coming on board?
So typically for Cabinet Committees, it is at Secretary-General level, or at least at Assistant Secretary who's leading. But within each department they would have also contributed. So you would have had, I suppose, that pulling together, and that would have been led by ourselves at Assistant Secretary level typically, and the same in Taoiseachs to prepare that work. Don't know, David, do you want to add anything to it?
I mean, we hope, Cathaoirleach, to maintain this approach in the Future Jobs Initiative as well. You know, this will work, again, we will lead on that jointly with the Department of Taoiseach, so we'll keep that kind of institutional setup because it's been successful, and we hope again to bring that kind of dynamic to bear on the Future Jobs Initiative.
I think perhaps what was also, and we found over time, when it started initially, it was very much put every possible action you can possibly think of into this plan. And the first plan, I think, had something like 320 actions. Now, we found over time, trying to keep track, and some of them were very small. Now, again, everything had an importance, but when we move now to the future jobs, we're talking about 20 big actions. So really trying to hone in on what's important. And it's not to say that those 20 actions ignore what's already happening, but for some departments, they're doing that work anyway. They don't need the collective cross-government approach that will be delivered. So I think for us, as we've learned over the 7 years of the Action Plan for Jobs, each next iteration reduced the number of actions, and we started to prioritise more about what was the high impact, what was the low impact. And certainly, as I say, as we move into this new phase in the new year, it'll be very much sort of what are the 20 big things that we can really do to drive Ireland's enterprise and economic approach for the next 10
And in relation to actually reaching the targets and putting pressure on every department to see what they could do in relation to creating job creation, be it education, social welfare, what was the stick?
Look, I suppose the stick, I mean, first of all, as I say, people actively engaged because it was so important and recognised as so important. The stick probably was the reporting, in that you met regularly with, be it the Taoiseach or be it your minister or be it at a cabinet committee, and you reported. And so that was probably part of the, wouldn't call it the stick, but it was, it was important from that perspective that we really kept quite a lot of track on it. And we also, collectively, there was a lot of actions that, you know, weren't just within one department. Like a lot of the things we do, we can't and we don't deliver ourselves, but we work with colleagues across government. So people recognised that, and there was a lot of people working together on joint projects, which was very positive.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else that any of you would like to say in conclusion?
No. Can I say to you, Oireachtas, if there's anything we can follow up in terms of support to you or your committee members, we're more than happy to feed in. We do have a lot of research and a lot of evidence that, you know, might help you in your deliberations.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senator.
Questions?
Yeah, if members have, very briefly, if you can keep these questions over, I'd like to finish within the next 5 minutes, if that's possible.
No,
just very brief questions.
This is very important because this is business enterprise and innovation is your remit. And how are we going to decouple the economic growth from the greenhouse gas emissions? So I suppose I'm a little bit disappointed because I was kind of hoping for a little bit of blue sky stuff here today, where we'd be talking about renewables and the enterprise and the opportunities that are happening here and now in terms of renewable, and I haven't heard anything in that regard. So that's one question in terms of decoupling the economic growth from greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing, Dr. Quinn, have you looked at the recommendations of the Assembly? Because what opportunities do you see in the recommendations of the Citizens' Assembly with regard to enterprise and innovation? And I'm just looking, for instance, at microgeneration. Like, how can your department support communities in terms of microgeneration? Like, what tools do you have available to make, recognising the urgency that we're faced with? 12 years. We're talking about 12 years. How are we really need a massive change in how we're doing business here in Ireland, enterprise, and we have recognised that we do have opportunities in terms of innovation. So just if you could give me some sense. And my last question is, what are you doing as a department to decrease greenhouse gas emissions in terms of oil exploration, oil and gas exploitation? So all of those mechanisms that are sending the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, what is your department to do to stop that happening as soon as possible?
I'm going to bring in just a question only.
It's a question, and I suppose it would be directed towards Professor Mark Ferguson. I think Science Foundation Ireland does great work, and I just want to acknowledge that. And I think you mentioned in your presentation, or you made reference to sort of marine energy resource, and you might comment on the commercial viability, or the road towards commercial viability of wave energy and wind, offshore wind. And I'm not talking about in the Irish Sea, I'm talking about in the Atlantic where it's more challenging.
Thank you. I'll bring you, do you want to come in, Professor?
I'll be very quick, and then maybe Mark, you would chip in. I mean, I think when you ask about the response to the Citizens' Assembly, of course, it's hugely important. But I do think the Citizens' Assembly was very much in the private, individual, less perhaps on the enterprise side. So we obviously have to look at it across the business in Ireland. And there are no doubt about it, Senator, there are conflicting objectives here. And for enterprises to be able to plan and change, it does take time. And it does take, it takes some of the areas we've touched on already in terms of supports and assistance, but it does take time. In terms of the microgeneration, I think if I send you over further details of what the regional action plans are doing, it's very much in that area where we have very dedicated work ongoing, and I think if I give you more, that'll help. And then maybe
Professor Ferguson.
Sure. So thank you very much. I'm delighted you asked a question about blue skies thinking. I will be brief, but that will be hard. So I think there are two things. I mean, all of your discussions appropriately are focused around mitigation, reducing emissions, trying to insulate, do things better, and that's terrific. You should definitely do that. But there is new science which is coming up, and that new science is about how you actively cut emissions without necessarily cutting activity. I can send to you a very good report on this from the Royal Society and the Royal Academy of Engineering called Greenhouse Gas Removal. I just want to pick out 2 or 3 things that are relevant to Ireland. So I've spoken a little bit about the rehydration of peatland and the carbon capture there. Please don't necessarily demonise oil and gas. You're getting very close to low carbon gas. Because what people are thinking about is you extract the gas, and there's a lot of it in Mayo offshore, and there's a lot of it around Cork, and then the area that you take the gas out of, you concentrate and pump back down carbon dioxide. And you are going to need those fossil fuels in any transition to a low-carbon economy. And the trick is to lower the carbon footprint of the gas extraction. There's a big business there in terms of reusing that vast amount of empty space that we take gas out of. Now I want to talk about something I haven't spoken about, and particularly for those of you from rural Ireland. 5% of the world's global emissions are from concrete manufacture. You use concrete for building. And that's because you heat up silica, and that gives off carbon dioxide and leaves you with a carbonate, which makes concrete. There is an alternative way of doing that, and that is to take basalt. There's a lot of basalt in Donegal and in the north of Ireland. You crush this up into a powder, and you spread it over the ground, and it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's one way of trapping carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. That can be used as a fertilizer, but interestingly, can also be used for making concrete. And if you make concrete in the way in which I've just described, not only have you reduced the carbon footprint, but the concrete is stronger, and throughout the life of the building, it absorbs CO2. So just imagine the future. You asked me some visionary thinking. We're going to grind up a bunch of basalt with a whole new industry in rural Ireland. Okay, I'm being imaginary here and visionary. We're going to make concrete in a very new way, which gives you stronger buildings, which absorb CO2 throughout their lifetime. That's a really interesting strategy. It's at the research stage, but it's also at the early implementation stage. So those are some of the things. I mean, there's a very exciting and active research pathway. It would be wrong to say that any of those are immediately commercializable at the moment, and that picks me on to the marine renewable energy. You asked about that. So marine renewable energy is definitely an active research area. At the moment, it's expensive and quite inefficient, and that's what the research is looking at. And certainly wind and so on is much more efficient at the present time. It doesn't mean that it can't improve. So there are very active research groups around the world. One of those is in Marai, our research centre in Cork. I advocate again that you visit there. You'll see a lot of their test wave tanks and so on. And it has potential for the future. That's what I would say. All of these things have potential for the future. And the last comment I would say is, as a scientist, I am optimistic. Climate change is a big problem and a big issue. But I remind you that no crisis that was ever predicted in human history has come to pass. Many times we have predicted that we were going to run out of food, and we've never run out of food. And why is that? It's because science and innovation has moved faster than the crisis. It's either the mechanisation on farms, it's the fertilisation of ground, it's genetic engineering of crops, whatever. It's moved faster. I believe the opportunity in climate change will be for the science and innovation to move faster than the problem. And that will be a combination of trying to do better what we do, which is all the mitigation stuff that's really important, and thinking about brand new industries. So please don't lose sight of that, and please don't lose sight of the fact that we have to transition from our existing fossil fuels into a new era, and part of that is low carbon gas.
Very last word, Senator Marcella.
I mean, if we are going to look to new technologies and new ways of doing things, then the most important is we do it for the common good.
Correct.
And that's what we're talking about when we talk about clean energy and renewable energy.
Absolutely.
And then we do it right. And that's what we're not doing as a nation now. We're not doing it right.
Can I just say, Senator, as a senior civil servant, we work for the common good and the public good, and that is our role, and that's what we aim to achieve every day in our daily work.
Thank you, and thank you all very much for coming before us this afternoon, and thank all the members. Yes.
The best message kept to the very last.
The future, hopefully, is bright. So, as there's no further business, this meeting of the Joint Committee is adjourned until next Wednesday, the 24th of October, 2 p.m. Is that agreed?